Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're following the scent of gold, really digging into this thing we call money and asking some hard questions about the modern capitalist idea that demands endless growth.
Yeah, it's a big one. We've got some fascinating sources lined up looking at, well, how humans learn to trust each other financially, how credit works, and frankly, the sometimes brutal cost of being able to put a price on everything.
We're going deep into how this purely mental invention money created a system of universal trust, but also how that same system enabled some incredibly organized, almost heartless actions, all in the name of growing the economic pie.
Right. It's a paradox. So where do we start?
Okay, let's set the scene. Forget Wall Street for a moment. We're going back to 1519 Mexico. Hernan Cortez and his conquistadors arrive. They meet the Aztecs.
And the Aztecs, they knew gold. They used it for beautiful jewelry, statues, that kind of thing. But their actual day-to-day money, it was more like cocoa beans or really nicely woven cloth.
So they were genuinely confused by the Spaniards' obsession with this soft yellow metal. I mean, you can't eat it, you can't drink it, you can't really make weapons out of it. It wasn't practical in the way cocoa or cloth was.
Exactly. And they actually asked Cortez about it. Why was this metal so important? And Cortez's answer, oh, it's pretty chilling. It really captures the mindset.
What did he say?
He said, because I and my companions suffer from a disease of the heart which can be cured only with gold.
Wow. A disease of the heart.
Okay.
That's quite a statement. It frames it almost like an addiction, an epidemic.
And it was spreading like one. What's truly amazing, our sources point out, is how this trust in gold, this disease, crossed even the most bitter divides. Think about the religious wars raging back then.
Christians and Muslims killing each other over doctrine, right?
Absolutely. Thousands dying over interpretations of God. Yet, when it came to money, they were perfectly happy to trade.
How did that work? Seems contradictory.
Well, look at the Christian conquerors in Spain during the Reconquista. They minted new coins with Christian symbols, sure, but they also minted something called the Mileris coin.
Okay, what was that?
It was a square coin, and get this, it had flowing Arabic script declaring the core Muslim belief. There is no God except Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's messenger, minted by Christians.
Hold on. Christian rulers putting Allah is God on their money. Why would they do that?
Because pragmatism trumped piety. They needed to trade, needed supplies. Muslim merchants had capital and trusted that script. It was about facilitating the transaction, not winning a theological argument right there on the coin.
And Muslim merchants were okay using Christian coins too.
Yep. Florentine florins, Venetian ducats, coins invoking Christ and Mary, they were all good for business. Even rulers calling for jihad would accept taxes paid in Christian currency.
So money really is the great equalizer then, or maybe the great neutralizer.
That's what the sources argue. Money is the peak of human tolerance, in a weird way. It's the only trust system we've made that works across almost any cultural gap. Religion, gender, race, politics, doesn't matter.
You don't have to like the person or believe what they believe.
You just have to trust that the coin you're getting will be accepted by the next person. That's the key. You trust it because everyone else trusts it.
Okay, so that's our mission today. We're diving into how this system got started, why we even needed it, then how that trust fueled credit and this whole capitalist idea of perpetual growth, and finally, what's the real price we pay for that relentless expansion?
Sounds good. Let's start with the problem money solves. Why couldn't we just stick with older systems?
Right, go way back, hunter-gatherer bands, small groups, maybe 30, 50 people. They didn't have money. It was all favors, obligations.
Yeah, an economy of favors. You share your hunt today, maybe someone helps you mend your tools tomorrow or cares for you when you're sick. It works in tight-knit communities where everyone knows everyone, and you expect to interact for years.
But then comes the agricultural revolution. Cities pop up, kingdoms form. Suddenly you have specialization. Full-time shoemakers, vintners, doctors, lawyers.
And you're dealing with thousands of strangers, people you might never see again. That economy of favors just breaks down completely. You can't rely on some future unspecified return from a stranger. You need something immediate, something measurable.
So, logically, people try barter, trading goods for goods directly.
They do, but this is where it gets messy, fast. Our sources use that classic example. The shoemaker and the apple grower.
Okay, walk us through it.
The shoemaker makes boots. The apple grower has apples. Simple trade, right? But how many apples for one pair of boots? Are they good apples? Sour apples? Big boots? Small shoes? What if leather is scarce this year because of a sheep plague?
Yeah, the relative value calculation gets complicated really quickly. It's all subjective.
Totally subjective, and it explodes exponentially as soon as you add more goods. Imagine a market with just 100 different things being traded. To know the value of everything relative to everything else, buyers and sellers would need to track 4,950 different exchange rates. Boots for wheat, wheat for knives, knives for pots.
4,950.
Yeah.
Just for 100 items.
Yep. And if you have 1,000 different commodities, you're looking at nearly 500,000 exchange rates, 499,500 to be precise. The human brain just can't manage that constantly for every single transaction. It's impossible.
And that's before you even hit the other big barter problem.
The coincidence of wants. Exactly.
Yeah.
Both people have to want what the other person has right then and there.
So the apple grower needs shoes, fine. But what if the shoemaker doesn't want apples? What if he wants, say, a divorce?
Right. Now, the apple grower has to find a lawyer who happens to want apples. And maybe that lawyer needs a haircut, not apples. The chain can get incredibly long and fragile. It relies way too much on luck.
Some places tried to organize large-scale barter, right? Like the Soviets.
They did, and it was mostly a massive failure. The Inca Empire had a more moderate, centrally managed system, but it was complex. Really, the easiest, most scalable solution was the invention of money.
And you called it a mental revolution earlier, not a tech breakthrough.
Exactly. It didn't require inventing bronze or iron. It was purely psychological, a new shared agreement, an intersubjective reality. It exists only because we collectively believe it exists and has value.
So money isn't inherently valuable metal. It's just anything people agree to use to represent value systematically.
Anything, as long as it can be used for exchange, storing wealth, and comparing the value of different things, apples, shoes, divorces, whatever.
And history shows it doesn't have to be metal at all.
Not at all. Cowrie shells are a prime example. Just simple seashells used as money for something like 4,000 years across huge parts of Africa, Asia, Oceania.
4,000 years. That's incredible staying power for a shell.
It really is. And the sources mention you could still pay your taxes in British Uganda with cowrie shells in the early 20th century. That tells you how deeply embedded that trust was.
And then there's the example of cigarettes.
Yeah, that one's striking because it's modern and happens in extreme situations. POW camps, concentration camps like Auschwitz. Cigarettes became the currency.
Even non-smokers use them.
Absolutely. Non-smokers accepted cigarettes, traded them, calculated prices in them. A loaf of bread might cost 12 cigarettes. A watch, maybe 200.
So it proves the point. The item itself doesn't need intrinsic value for the user. It just needs everyone else to believe it has exchange value.
Precisely. Everyone always wants money because everyone else also always wants money. That circular logic, that shared trust, is the absolute bedrock.
It's the most efficient system of mutual trust we've ever come up with.
It is. But that trust isn't magic. It's constantly reinforced by complex networks, political, social, religious. The king demands taxes be paid in his coins. The church demands tithes. That forces the currency down into every level of society and makes it universally necessary.
It reminds me of the dollar bill today. You've got the signature of the Treasury Secretary, a symbol of state power, right next to "In God We Trust." It's like an open admission. This paper relies on both secular authority and a kind of collective faith.
A very good analogy. Historically, though, the first money did often have some intrinsic value, which probably helped build that initial trust. Think Sumerian barley money around 3000 BC.
Right, you could actually eat it.
Exactly. It had biological value. Salaries were paid in silas, basically liters of barley. A male worker got about 60 silas a month, but, barley spoils. And hauling huge amounts of it around is tough.
Logistics become the bottleneck, which led to metals.
It did. Specifically, the silver shekel in Mesopotamia, mid-3rd millennium BC. About 8.33 grams of silver. And this was a key step because silver doesn't really have inherent biological value.
It's too soft for tools.
Okay.
It's more like status.
Purely status, decoration. But it was durable, divisible, and much easier to transport than tons of grain. Its value was purely conventional, agreed upon. We see it in ancient texts, Joseph being sold for 20 silver shekels, about 166 grams worth.
But weighing out bits of silver for every transaction still seems clumsy.
It was. Which brings us to the final big innovation, coins. First appearing in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, around 640 BC.
And coins solved the final problems.
They solved two big ones. First, standardized weight, no more carrying scales everywhere. Second, the mark of authority of the king's stamp or the city's symbol. That mark guaranteed the weight and purity.
So it's not just silver, it's certified silver.
Precisely. And that certification was backed by the state's power. Counterfeiting wasn't just theft, it was lese majesty, an attack on the king's sovereignty, punished incredibly harshly because it threatened the very trust the system relied on.
That state backing allowed these currencies to travel, didn't it? Like the Roman denarius.
Hugely. The denarius was trusted so much it was used in markets in India, thousands of miles away, long after the goods had left Roman territory. People trusted Rome, trusted its systems, trusted its coins.
And the names even lived on.
They did. Denarius has become the Arabic dinar, still used today. It shows how powerful these monetary systems became. Eventually, cultures like China and India, which had their own systems, had to adopt gold and silver standards too, just to participate in global trade, even if they didn't value the metals intrinsically at first.
So money, this mental construct, gives us two huge societal shifts. First, universal convertibility.
Yes, the alchemist effect. Money lets you turn almost anything into almost anything else. Land becomes loyalty when you pay soldiers. Justice becomes health when you pay a doctor. Our source even mentions, somewhat cynically, how 15th century prostitutes could apparently buy church indulgences, converting sex into salvation via money.
Everything becomes potentially exchangeable.
Pretty much. And the second principle is universal trust. Two people who utterly despise each other, who wouldn't trust each other with anything personally, can still cooperate effectively on a project because they both trust the money that mediates their interaction.
It bypasses personal feelings, and it lets you store wealth, move it easily.
Yeah, think of a farmer selling everything house, land for a bag of cowrie shells, then moving halfway across the world, confident those shells will still buy him what he needs. That's powerful portability of value.
Okay, so money is this incredibly useful, almost perfect tool for cooperation and exchange. But what's the catch? What's the price of money itself?
The dark side. The critique that runs through centuries of philosophy is that universal convertibility starts to corrode things we don't think should have a price.
Like what? Honor, loyalty, love.
Exactly. Things traditionally considered priceless. Communities are often built on shared values, on bonds of kinship or allegiance that are explicitly not for sale. Money constantly pushes against those boundaries, trying to turn everything into a commodity.
So, if we start trusting the impersonal coin more than the complex person or the sacred ideal, does that make society colder, more transactional? Is that the price?
That's the fundamental fear. That money breaks down the communal dams, the social glue, and risks turning the world into just one giant, heartless marketplace where every interaction is measured in profit and loss. We shift our trust from people and principles to the anonymous currency and the system backing it.
Which leads us straight into the modern era, where this system of trust isn't just about exchange anymore. It's about credit and growth, perpetual growth.
Exactly. The last 500 years have been defined by that one word, growth. Look at the numbers. In 1500, global per capita production was maybe $550 a year in today's money. Now, it's around $8,800.
That's a massive jump, 16 times bigger.
Stupendous growth. And it's almost entirely built on a new kind of trust. Trust in the future. And the economic mechanism for that trust is credit.
Credit being money that doesn't quite exist yet.
Essentially, yes. It represents imaginary goods, goods we believe will exist in the future. It requires this deep, almost religious faith that our future resources and productivity will vastly exceed our present ones.
How does it actually work in practice? The sources mention a kind of banking magic trick.
Yeah, the Samuel Greedy Bank and Jane McDonagh Bakery example illustrates it well.
Sure.
Let's say a contractor, Mr. Stone, deposits $1 million cash in Greedy's bank.
Okay, bank has $1 million in the vault.
Now, McDonagh wants to build a bakery. She gets a $1 million loan from Greedy, so her account now shows $1 million. She pays the contractor, Stone, with a check from that account. Stone deposits the check.
So now Stone's account shows $2 million, the original cash plus the payment.
Exactly. Stone has $2 million on paper. But how much actual cash is in Greedy's vault?
Still just the original $1 million.
Right. The bank has loaned out money it doesn't physically possess. It's covered only by the promise of future profits from McDonagh's bakery. If Stone needs another $1 million for materials, Greedy might loan it, Stone deposits it. Now Stone has $3 million in his account. Vault still only has $1 million cash.
That feels fragile.
Yeah.
Isn't that like a Ponzi scheme relying on future money to cover present obligations?
It has that feel, and it can collapse if the future doesn't deliver. But the key difference is the potential real asset being created, the profitable bakery. If the bank correctly predicts the bakery will eventually generate that value, the system holds. The $2 million created money is backed by collective faith in future bread sales.
So it's trust in future productivity that justifies the gap.
Precisely. And this isn't some shady backroom deal, it's codified. In the US, for instance, banks are typically allowed to lend out about $10 for every $1 they actually hold in reserve. So 90% of the money you see in bank accounts isn't backed by physical cash, it's fiat money, existing purely by trust.
Now, the pre-modern world just didn't think like this.
Generally, no. They tended to assume the total amount of wealth was fixed, maybe even shrinking. The pie was static, so if someone got rich, it was often assumed they must have taken it from someone else. Making a large profit felt inherently suspect, even sinful, the concept of usury.
And that belief created its own reality, didn't it? A stagnation trap.
Absolutely. Because profit was viewed negatively, credit was scarce. Loans were small, short-term, high interest. Nobody could easily finance big, ambitious projects that might take years to pay off, like building a factory or funding a risky voyage. The expectation of stagnation became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Until the scientific revolution changed thinking. The idea that progress is possible.
Exactly. That idea, admitting ignorance, investing in research, believing things can get better spilled over into economics, suddenly the pie wasn't fixed. It could grow.
Enter Adam Smith, 1776, The Wealth of Nations.
Smith made a truly revolutionary moral argument. He said, basically, that the entrepreneur's selfish desire to increase his own private profit actually benefits everyone. Why? Because the rational way to increase profit is to reinvest it, hire more workers, buy better machines, produce more goods more efficiently.
So greed is good, essentially. Individual ambition drives collective prosperity.
That was the radical idea. It flipped the moral script. Wealth creation wasn't zero-sum anymore. It was potentially a win-win. The rich weren't necessarily exploiting others. They were growing the pie for all. This eased centuries of guilt around accumulating wealth.
And this gives us the core capitalist ethic, right? The distinction between just having wealth and having capital.
Yes. Capitalism isn't just about being rich. It's about reinvesting profits to increase production. Wealth is static gold buried in a chest, a pharaoh's non-productive pyramid. Capital is wealth put to work, money invested to make more money, more production.
Which explains why, maybe counterintuitively, modern elites, CEOs, traders might seem less focused on opulent personal display than, say, medieval nobles. Their primary drive, dictated by the system, is reinvestment and growth.
The system demands it. Growth becomes the supreme good, promising that eventually justice, freedom, happiness will follow for everyone as long as that pie keeps expanding. But this system needed muscle. It needed political backing and global reach.
Which is where capitalism starts merging with empire building. Conquest wasn't just funded by taxes anymore, but by credit.
Think Columbus. He pitched his voyage idea all over Europe. Portugal said no, too risky. Queen Isabella of Spain eventually took the gamble, invested. The payoff, gold and silver from the Americas, then fueled more European growth, more investment, more expansion.
It creates that magic circle of imperial capitalism.
Right. Credit funds discovery, discovery leads to colonies, colonies generate profit, profit builds trust, trust attracts more credit, rinse and repeat. It gave European entrepreneurs a dynamism older empires couldn't match.
And the key ingredient was always trust. You mentioned the Dutch earlier, defeating Spain.
A classic case. Tiny Netherlands, few natural resources, up against the superpower of the age. How? Not just military prowess, but financial credibility.
What do they do right?
Well, first, what Spain did wrong. The Spanish king kept defaulting on his debts 4 times in the late 16th century. That destroys trust. The Dutch, meanwhile, paid their debts reliably. Crucially, their legal system fiercely protected private property. Rulers couldn't just seize assets.
So capital feels safer there.
Exactly. Money flows away from arbitrary dictatorships and towards predictable rule of law. This reliability allowed things like the Joint Stock Company to flourish. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, is the prime example.
That was the company that basically ran Indonesia.
For almost 200 years.
Yeah.
Funded by shareholders, it raised its own armies, fought wars, conquered territory, all to generate profit for investors back in Amsterdam, a private company running an empire. Its sister company, the WIC, built New Amsterdam, later New York. That wall they built for defense, Wall Street.
That's incredible success built on trust. Now, contrast that with the disaster in France, the Mississippi bubble.
Oh yeah, 1717 to 1719, a spectacular implosion. The Mississippi Company was supposed to colonize Louisiana and make everyone rich. The problem was its director, John Law.
What about him?
He had this massive conflict of interest. He ran the company, and he was governor of France's central bank, and he was the country's chief financial officer. He was basically regulating himself.
Not a good setup.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Share prices went nuts, from 500 livres up to 10,000, based on pure hype. When the inevitable panic selling started, Law used his position as finance minister to order the central bank to print money like crazy to buy up the shares and keep the price high.
He put the entire national financial system inside the bubble.
He did. And when it burst, it wasn't just investors who got wiped out. It shattered public faith in the French monarchy's financial competence. The crown was seen as reckless, untrustworthy.
And that had long-term consequences.
Huge ones. Louis XV, and later Louis VI, found it incredibly difficult to borrow money. That underlying debt crisis, stemming from the loss of financial trust after the bubble, was a major factor leading straight to the French Revolution in 1789. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild.
The power of capital to influence governments just grew from there, didn't it? The
So.
sources call Western governments almost a capitalist trade union.
You see it starkly in the First Opium War, 1840-42. British merchants were making fortunes selling opium in China against the Chinese government's wishes due to the devastating social impact.
And these merchants had political connections.
Absolutely. MPs, even cabinet members, held stock in these opium companies. They lobbied hard, pressured the British government to go to war.
And the justification was
Free trade. Seriously. Britain used its superior military tech steamboats, modern artillery to defeat China, force them to pay compensation to the drug dealers, and hand over Hong Kong. It was naked military force used to protect shareholder profits from drug traffic.
That's ethically staggering. Capital dictating war policy for drug money.
It shows how intertwined finance and state power became. Even war itself could be traded. Look at the Greek rebellion against the Ottomans in 1821.
How did finance play in there?
The Greek rebels issued bonds, Greek rebellion bonds, sold on the London Stock Exchange to fund their fight. But then the Turks started winning and the bonds looked worthless. The bondholders faced ruin.
They complained to their government.
Loudly. And suddenly, the financial interests of these London bondholders became a matter of British national interest. Britain intervened militarily, sinking the Ottoman fleet at the Battle of Navarino in 1827, which effectively saved the Greek rebellion and, not coincidentally, the bonds.
So today, a country's credit rating, its perceived stability and rule of law, is more valuable than oil fields.
In many ways, yes. Global capital needs that trust. If the financial system trusts your country's institutions, investment flows in. If it doesn't, you'll struggle no matter your natural resources. That's the power the system wields.
But this relentless focus on profit on the market, it leads us to the really dark side, what the sources call the capitalist hell.
Yeah, the argument for the completely free market, stemming from Smith, is that government should stay out, trust investors to do the right thing for profit, which helps everyone.
But that assumes the market works perfectly, right?
It does, and the sources argue that's naive. Without strong political checks, police, courts, regulations, what stops capitalists from colluding, forming monopolies, exploiting workers ruthlessly if there's nowhere else for them to go?
If the market is truly free of oversight, the powerful can just take over.
That's the danger. The logical endpoint of a completely unregulated market, driven purely by profit maximization, can be things like debt peonage or even outright slavery.
And the Atlantic slave trade is presented as the prime example of this.
The horrific, large-scale example. It wasn't driven by religious hatred or racist ideology primarily, though those certainly played a role in justifying it. Fundamentally, it was driven by economics, the massive European craving for cheap sugar.
Sugar production was brutal, labor-intensive work.
Incredibly so, especially in the tropics. Paying free laborers fair wages would have made sugar a luxury good. The cold economic calculation was that forced labor slavery was the only way to produce it cheaply enough for the mass market. 10 million Africans forcibly brought to the Americas, about 70% ending up on sugar plantations.
And this whole horrific system was financed by the free market?
Organized, financed, insured by the capitalist system we've been discussing. Ordinary middle-class Europeans bought shares in slave trading companies. It was seen as a solid investment, yielding steady profits, around 6% annually in the 18th century.
So capitalism in this instance killed millions.
Not out of malice necessarily, but out of what the sources term cold indifference coupled with greed. It was a rational economic decision within that framework, maximizing return on investment regardless of the human cost.
We see a similar logic later in the Congo Free State.
Absolutely. King Leopold VII of Belgium set it up initially with humanitarian justifications.
Yeah.
But it quickly became a brutal machine for extracting rubber profit between 1885 and 1908.
How did they enforce production?
Through terror. Villagers who failed to meet impossible rubber quotas faced horrific punishment, notoriously including having their hands chopped off. This wasn't random cruelty, it was systematic enforcement to maximize shareholder returns back in Europe.
And the human cost.
Estimated at 6 to 10 million deaths. Maybe 20% or more of the population wiped out purely for cheap rubber. Again, the primary driver was maximizing profit within the system.
The sources suggest this unrestrained cruelty lessened a bit after World War II.
Yes, partly because the threat of communism forced capitalist countries to adopt a more human face, implementing welfare states, regulations to prove their system was morally superior. The raw edges were smoothed somewhat.
But the fundamental answer capitalism gives to its own historical atrocities, its inequalities, is still the same, isn't it?
Pretty much. Just wait. Be patient. The pie is still growing. Eventually, it will be big enough for everyone to get a decent slice.
Which brings us to the final, perhaps most disturbing point. What if technology makes the everyone part of that promise obsolete? The idea of the useless class.
This is the potential endgame scenario raised in the sources. The fear that technology, particularly AI, is decoupling intelligence from consciousness. And the economic system primarily values intelligence, not consciousness.
Historically, our economic value came from muscles and brains, our ability to do things and think things.
Right. But now, algorithms are getting incredibly good at pattern recognition, which is the basis for a huge amount of human cognitive work. We saw it with chess, Deep Blue beating Kasparov. Then Go, a vastly more complex game, AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol.
The AI doesn't need to feel anything about the game. It just needs to process the patterns better than a human.
Exactly. Consciousness feeling joy, suffering, love is becoming optional for economic production. A self-driving truck doesn't need to appreciate the scenery. It just needs to follow traffic laws and delivery routes efficiently. And algorithms are proving they can do that better, cheaper, safer than humans in more and more domains.
And the issue is our specialization.
That's the argument. Hunter-gatherers needed broad competence. Modern humans specialize cardiologist, accountant, truck driver. AI only needs to outperform us in that one specific narrow ability to make the human worker economically redundant in that field.
The job loss projections are alarming. You mentioned 47% of U.S. jobs at high risk.
According to that Oxford study, yes, by 2033. Look at the specifics. Telemarketers, 99% risk. Sports refs, 98%. Cashiers, 97%. Bus drivers, 89%. Anything routine based on recognizing patterns or predictable physical actions is vulnerable.
And there's that weird paradox about which jobs are safe.
Right. Archaeology, for example, only a 1% risk of being automated. Why? Not because it's too intellectually complex for AI, but because it doesn't generate massive profits.
Right.
So corporations have little incentive to pour billions into automating it. Automation follows the money.
This tech wave also challenges basic ideas about individualism, doesn't it? As algorithms know us better than we know ourselves.
We're already crossing that threshold, willingly handing over authority. Think about medical decisions. Angelina Jolie's choice for a preventative double mastectomy.
She trusted the genetic probability score over her own feelings.
Exactly. Her feelings likely said, I feel fine. The algorithm said 87% chance of cancer. She listened to the data, the probability calculated by the system, not her intuition. That's a profound shift.
And we do it daily with smaller things. Letting Waze choose our route, letting Amazon recommend books, letting streaming services choose our music.
We trust the algorithms because often they do know our preferences or the optimal path better than we do ourselves. Amazon Kindle can apparently monitor biometric responses, heart rate, blood pressure to see how different sentences affect you as you read.
It's invasive.
And revealing. One study suggested the Facebook algorithm, after analyzing 300 of your likes, can predict your opinions and desires more accurately than your own spouse can. We trade privacy for convenience and perceived optimality.
And this all circles back to the capitalist drive for growth and efficiency.
If the system demands constant improvement, constant optimization, it will inevitably favor the most efficient processor of information or the most efficient actor, And increasingly, that's non-conscious algorithms, not humans.
So if AI becomes the most productive worker, where does that leave the human workforce? Does the promise of the ever-growing pie finally break down?
That's the fear. If human labor becomes largely redundant, the traditional capitalist bargain, work hard, contribute to growth, and you'll benefit, falls apart for potentially billions of people.
Okay, let's try to wrap this immense journey up. We started with money as this strange psychological tool to solve barter's problems. We saw how trust became the fuel for credit. We explored capitalism's relentless demand for growth, which brought both incredible wealth and, frankly, horrific cruelty, slavery. The Congo often financed with that same cold indifference coupled with greed.
And the central paradox holds. A system built on the idea that individual self-interest serves the collective good, yet capable of immense harm when that self-interest is unchecked, reducing human value to a number on a spreadsheet.
For centuries, the answer to the system's flaws was always more growth. The pie will get bigger. But this is where we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought. Something to really chew on.
Can that economic pie actually grow forever on a finite planet? Especially as automation makes human labor less necessary for production.
Or is the ultimate, perhaps unintended price of pursuing infinite market growth the creation of a vast, economically irrelevant, useless class? Humans managed by algorithms, owned by the tiny elite who control the AI and the capital that runs it.
Is the relentless logic of the system that gave us so much now poised to deem the majority of humanity itself as surplus to requirements? That's the unsettling question hanging over the future of money, growth, and maybe us.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we really try to get under the hood of the big ideas shaping our world.
Yeah, and today we're tackling something massive. Not your usual quarterly earnings report or, political polls.
Definitely not. We're diving into a technological shift that's so fundamental, it might actually challenge what it means to be a valuable human being, like at its core.
That's exactly the mission for today. We're drawing on some pretty heavy sources, analyses, looking at history, algorithms, biotech, and they all point towards this radical potential outcome, the whole liberal world order, built on the idea that every single person has inherent value.
Right, the foundation.
Well, technology is presenting, let's call them 3 practical threats that could genuinely pull that foundation apart.
Okay, 3 threats. Let's try and break that down because it sounds huge.
Yeah.
So first, you're saying masses of people might lose their economic worth, their military usefulness, creating what the sources call a useless class.
That's the first one. And second, the very idea of the individual, that core liberal concept of a unique self might just dissolve, kind of replaced by these all-knowing algorithms managing things.
Wow. Okay, and the third?
The third is maybe the most sci-fi sounding, but potentially the most disruptive: biological inequality.
Yeah.
Scientific upgrades creating actual physical splits in Homo sapiens, like different castes.
Okay, so uselessness, the end of the individual, biological castes. If those 3 things happen together.
The sources argue the whole structure could just collapse, the liberal world order as we know it.
It's a lot. So where do we start?
We have to start at the beginning, really, with that historical context. How did we even get this idea of universal value? This takes us straight into the first big shift, the Great Decoupling.
Right, because we tend to think of rights, universal rights, as this sort of abstract moral good. But the argument here is it was always tied to usefulness, wasn't it? A practical bargain.
Exactly. You can't understand the threat of decoupling without seeing that historical link. Think about the French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Beautiful idea.
A cornerstone of modern thought.
But it wasn't just a philosophical epiphany happening in a vacuum. It happened right alongside the levée en masse in 1793. Mass conscription. The state suddenly demanded everyone participate in total war.
Ah, so if the state needs you to fight, potentially die, or work nonstop in a factory to support the war?
Then the state has to give you value. It has to grant you rights. It's a direct trade-off. Your usefulness buys your rights.
That's a pretty stark connection. You're needed on the mass battlefield, so you become politically valuable.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing in 1793. It carried on. Look at the push for women's suffrage, especially around World War I.
Woodrow Wilson's argument.
Right. In 1918, Wilson basically said, look, this war couldn't have been fought without women stepping up in the factories, on the farms, everywhere. Their massive economic contribution, their usefulness in a total war context.
That was the justification for giving them the vote. Usefulness paving the way for political rights.
But that deal, that fundamental bargain, it's starting to break down. And the first place we really see it clearly is on the battlefield. We're shifting away from mass armies.
Towards high-tech warfare, right? Drones, cyber, special forces.
Precisely. Modern militaries don't need millions of guys with rifles anymore. They need small teams. Highly trained specialists, drone operators, cyber experts, engineers managing autonomous systems, a handful of people, really.
And in this new kind of conflict, especially cyber warfare, human speed is actually a disadvantage, isn't it?
Totally. Cyber attacks happen in seconds, milliseconds even. A human general needing hours or even days to figure things out and give an order, they're just too slow. The system can't wait.
And our basic human needs, hunger, fear, fatigue, they become liabilities in this context.
They become critical flaws. An algorithm doesn't get tired. It doesn't panic. And here's a really interesting, maybe provocative point the sources raise. Algorithms might even be preferable for ethical reasons.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, think about the horrors of war. Human soldiers, under extreme stress, fear, rage, they commit atrocities. It's a tragic reality. But an algorithm, if programmed with the rules of engagement, with international law,
it could theoretically follow those rules perfectly, without emotion getting in the way.
That's the argument. It could potentially conform to the laws of war more reliably than a stressed, emotional human being. Now, obviously, that raises huge questions about programming, about bias, about accountability.
Like, who's responsible if the algorithm does make a mistake?
Yeah.
A catastrophic one. Can we really trust the programmers to get the ethics right for a killing machine? That feels like a massive leap.
It's a huge leap, absolutely. And the accountability question is enormous. But from a purely military utility perspective, the calculation is shifting. The human mass is becoming less necessary, maybe even less reliable for the core functions of warfare.
So the majority of people are losing that fundamental military value that historically underpinned their rights.
That's the first part of the decoupling. Military usefulness is fading for the masses.
Okay, so if military value is shrinking, let's pivot to the economy. Because the sources say there's a parallel decoupling happening there, driven by something even more fundamental, separating intelligence from consciousness.
Right. This is the absolute core engine of the economic side of the great decoupling. For centuries, we just assumed that to do complex things, things that required high intelligence, you needed to be conscious.
Like playing chess, diagnosing an illness, driving a car. You needed a thinking, feeling being inside.
Exactly. But what we're realizing now is that a lot of what we call intelligence in these tasks is actually sophisticated pattern recognition. And guess what? Non-conscious algorithms are getting incredibly good at that.
The taxi driver example they use is pretty stark here.
It really brings it home. The human taxi driver might be appreciating the music on the radio, thinking about life, watching the stars. Their consciousness is rich and complex.
But the system doesn't care about any of that.
Not at all. The system, whether it's Uber or just the transportation network, wants one thing: get passenger from A to B. Safely, quickly, cheaply. The driver's inner life. Irrelevant.
And a non-conscious self-driving algorithm can potentially do those core tasks, safe, quick, cheap transport, better than the human. It follows traffic laws perfectly, it doesn't get tired, it optimizes routes constantly.
It's superior in the specific metrics the system actually values, which leads to the horse analogy.
Right. Cars didn't replace horses because they were better at everything a horse could do.
Exactly. A horse can smell things, jump fences, navigate rough terrain way better than an early car could. It had more general awareness, but the car was vastly superior at the few specific things the industrial system needed: hauling stuff reliably on roads, predictable travel.
So the fear is that humans, like horses, will be replaced not because AI is better at everything humans do, but because it's vastly better at the specific, narrow tasks the 21st century economy values most highly.
And that displacement isn't just hitting manual labor. It's coming for white-collar jobs, specialized professions, everything, because the underlying science makes it almost inevitable. The sources lay out 3 key principles here.
Okay, let's get into these. These are the pillars supporting the idea of the useless class, right?
Pretty much. Principle 1, organisms are algorithms. Humans, animals, plants. We're all just incredibly complex biological algorithms shaped by millions of years of evolution. Our feelings, thoughts, memories, they're biochemical processes.
Okay, so we're organic algorithms. What's principle 2?
Principle 2, Algorithmic calculation doesn't care about the material. It doesn't matter if the processing happens in carbon-based neurons or silicon-based chips. An algorithm is an algorithm.
And silicon can be faster, cheaper, more efficient to build and network.
Exactly. We're rapidly overcoming the limitations of our biological hardware. Which leads to principle 3. Organic algorithms can be replicated and surpassed. There's no fundamental law of science saying a biological algorithm can do something a non-biological one can't, especially if the non-biological one has more processing power and data access.
Put those three together. Organisms are algorithms. Algorithms don't care about the material. Non-organic algorithms can surpass organic ones.
Yeah.
And the conclusion feels pretty inescapable.
It suggests widespread displacement is not just possible, but likely. And the scary part is that old historical pattern where new jobs always emerge to replace the old ones, like moving from farms to factories to service industries, that pattern isn't guaranteed anymore.
Why not? What's different this time?
Specialization. Humans have become incredibly specialized. Think about it. A hunter-gatherer was the ultimate generalist. They had to know medicine, engineering, psychology, tracking, botany, everything. Replacing that kind of general intelligence is hard.
But today, we have cardiologists who only know hearts, taxi drivers who only know roads, accountants who only know specific tax codes.
Exactly. We specialize into narrower and narrower niches, and that makes us easier to replace. An algorithm can ingest every single piece of medical research on cardiology or every tax law ever written instantly. It can surpass the human specialist in their own narrow field relatively easily.
We've seen the milestones already, haven't we? Deep Blue beating Kasparov way back in '96.
Then Google DeepMind in 2015, teaching itself dozens of Atari games from scratch, finding strategies humans never thought of. And AlphaGo in 2016.
Beating Lee Sedol, the world Go champion, 4-1. Using moves that just baffled human experts. They weren't just learning, they were creating, innovating beyond us.
And it's not just games or specific tasks, it's moving into management. Uber manages millions of drivers worldwide with a relatively tiny number of human staff overseeing the algorithms.
And didn't some investment firm actually put an algorithm on its board?
Yeah, Deep Knowledge Ventures appointed an algorithm called Vital, its job, to analyze data and vote on investment decisions. So the algorithms aren't just doing the work, they're starting to make the high-level capital allocation decisions too.
So if algorithms can outperform human managers and investors, they'll end up controlling more and more wealth, presumably on behalf of the few humans who own the algorithms.
That seems the likely trajectory. Which brings us back full circle to that political question. What happens to the masses? The useless class? If the system doesn't need most people for work or war, what is their purpose? What keeps society stable?
The sources suggest a couple of possibilities, maybe universal basic income or services if the AI generates enough wealth to support everyone.
That's the optimistic-ish scenario, economically speaking. But even then, the challenge becomes, well, what do people do all day? How do you find meaning and prevent social unrest if billions have no economic purpose?
And this is where it gets really dystopian. The idea of managing the masses with, drugs and computer games.
Yeah, basically pacification through pleasure. Keeping the potentially restless masses content, maybe even happy, by immersing them in sophisticated virtual reality worlds, perhaps combined with mood-regulating drugs. A kind of managed artificial bliss. La La Land, as one source puts it.
That just feels profoundly bleak. It completely undermines the liberal idea that human experience itself, our struggles, our choices, our feelings are the source of meaning.
It's a mortal blow to that belief. If the ultimate human experience for billions becomes just consuming algorithmically generated stimuli in a VR headset, what's sacred about that? Where's the dignity? Where's the value?
So governments would face this choice. Either heavily police the useless class to maintain order, or manage their internal state, their biochemistry, their virtual experiences to keep them passively content.
And that shift from focusing on freedom to focusing on managed happiness via control, that's the perfect segue into the second major threat.
Right, because even if the system somehow still needs us, maybe as consumers or data points, this second threat attacks the very idea of the individual, the philosophical heart of liberalism. Okay, let's lay out those core liberal assumptions again. The ones technology is supposedly shattering.
There are three main ones. First, I am an individual, meaning indivisible. A single, unified self with one authentic inner voice telling my story.
Second, my authentic self is fundamentally free. I made choices based on my own free will.
And third, only I have access to my inner world, my feelings, my thoughts. Therefore, I know myself best. This is the basis for the voter knows best, the customer is always right. My subjective experience is the ultimate authority.
But modern life sciences, especially in neuroscience and behavioral genetics, are just dismantling these assumptions, aren't they?
Systematically. Take the first one, the single indivisible self. Biology shows we're actually individuals. We're composed of many different, often conflicting algorithms or mental modules.
Like the internal battles we have all the time, wanting to save money but splurging on something, deciding to eat healthy but craving junk food.
Exactly. There's no single CEO in the brain. It's more like a parliament, with different factions constantly vying for control. The narrating self that makes plans and tells our life story is often overridden by the experiencing self that just wants immediate gratification. We're not unified. We're a messy collection.
Okay, so we're individuals, not individuals. What about free will? The second assumption.
Well, if we accept that we're algorithms, biochemical algorithms shaped by genes and environment, then our decisions are the output of those algorithms. They might be deterministic, predictable if you knew all inputs, or random, due to quantum effects maybe, but neither of those is free in the way liberalism means it.
The scientific picture doesn't seem to have room for this ghost in the machine making undetermined choices.
Not really.
Yeah.
Which leads to the third and maybe the most existentially challenging refutation. External algorithms can know me better than I know myself.
Because they don't have access to my internal self.
No, because they have access to data. Vast amounts of data about my biology, my behavior, my choices, my reactions data streams that I'm often not even consciously aware of, or that my narrating self conveniently forgets or rationalizes away.
Like my heart rate variability, my browsing history, my purchase patterns, my social media interactions.
All of it. An external algorithm crunching all that data can spot patterns, predict my behavior, understand my triggers and preferences with an accuracy that my own biased, limited self-awareness just can't match. It can essentially hack my operating system.
This wasn't possible before, right? Old school Big Brother, the Stasi, the KGB, they couldn't track your dopamine levels 24/7.
Exactly. They lacked the biometric sensors and the computing power, but now we're increasingly volunteering this data through wearables, smartphones, online activity. We're building our own surveillance systems.
And when that external algorithm consistently makes better predictions about us or better decisions for us than we make ourselves, authority starts to shift.
It inevitably shifts. We start trusting the algorithm more than our own feelings or intuition. The Angelina Jolie example is powerful here.
Right. Her decision about preventative surgery wasn't based on how she felt.
Not at all. She felt fine. She had no symptoms. Her subjective feeling was, I'm healthy. But the genetic test, the algorithm, spat out a number. 87% probability of developing breast cancer due to the BRCA1 gene mutation.
An objective statistical reality versus a subjective feeling.
And she chose to trust the number. She acted on the algorithm's prediction, overriding her own sense of well-being. That decision happening in millions of smaller ways every day with health apps, fitness trackers, financial advice algorithms, it sets a precedent.
We defer to the data. We trust the numbers more than ourselves.
It's the whole philosophy behind the quantified self movement, isn't it? Self-knowledge through numbers. Forget introspection. Just collect enough data, run the right analysis, and the algorithm will tell you who you are and what you should do.
It even extends into really personal areas, like the source mentioning that bedpost armband.
Yeah, measuring sexual performance, heart rate, duration, calories burned, turning this incredibly complex, subjective human experience into a set of precise numbers for validation. It's like we're actively seeking external objective validation because we've lost faith in our own internal compass.
And these external systems are getting better, not just at knowing us individually, but collectively too. Google flu trends.
A classic early example from 2008. Just by tracking search terms, headache, fever, sneezing, correlated with location, Google could spot flu outbreaks about 10 days faster than the official health services relying on doctor reports. Purely predictive power from aggregated data.
But the Facebook example is maybe even more striking. The study showing it could predict your personality and preferences better than your spouse just from likes.
That one's chilling. Think about it. 300 likes. That's all it took for the algorithm to understand your opinions, your personality traits, even your potential vulnerabilities more accurately than the person you share your life with.
The level of psychological intimacy achieved by a non-conscious system is just staggering.
And profoundly powerful. If an algorithm knows you better than your partner, it knows exactly what messages will resonate, what fears to trigger, what desires to tap into.
Which has obvious implications for manipulation, especially politically.
Absolutely. The source mentions the potential for platforms like Facebook to identify key swing voters in an election, understand their deep psychological profiles based on their data, and then feed them perfectly tailored news or misinformation to sway their vote, potentially without them even realizing they're being targeted so specifically.
We're trading our deepest psychological insights for cat videos and connection requests, essentially.
And that superior knowledge, that oracle power, is the stepping stone to the next stage.
Right, because once we start trusting these algorithms implicitly, because they demonstrably know better or predict better, they don't just stay as passive advisors, do they?
No, the sources argued there's a natural progression, a three-stage evolution from oracle to agent to sovereign.
Okay, stage one, the Oracle app, that's like Waze, right?
Perfect example. You're driving, your gut says turn right. Waze crunches the real-time traffic data and says turn left. After getting stuck in traffic a few times ignoring it, you learn. You start trusting Waze's advice over your own intuition. You still make the turn, but you're essentially always following its recommendation. It's the trusted advisor.
Okay, so Oracle is stage one. What's stage two?
Stage two is the agent. This is where you give the algorithm a goal, and it handles all the intermediate steps without needing your constant input.
Like connecting Waze to a self-driving car. You just say, take me home the fastest way.
Exactly. You've delegated the goal. The algorithm now makes all the micro decisions when to brake, accelerate, change lanes to achieve that goal efficiently. You've handed over execution.
And then comes the big leap. Stage three, the sovereign.
This is where the algorithm doesn't just execute your will or offer advice. It starts making decisions for you, often for the greater good of the system, potentially overriding your individual preferences.
The Waze example again. If telling everyone about the clear Route B just creates a new traffic jam on Route B,
then the sovereign Waze has to be smarter. It might analyze the overall traffic flow and decide to only inform, say, half the drivers about Route B. It deliberately withholds information from you, even though Route B is faster for you individually right now, because letting everyone know would make the whole system worse.
So it's managing the collective outcome, even if it feels like manipulation or control to the individual driver who wasn't told about the better route. The algorithm is optimizing the system, not just serving my immediate desire.
Precisely. It's making decisions at a systemic level. And this kind of authority is being actively built into things like personalized AI assistants, Cortana, Google Assistant, Siri.
These systems that promise to manage our lives by accessing all our data. Emails, calendars, biometrics.
Everything. The goal is for Cortana, or its equivalent, to know you so well it can anticipate your needs, manage your schedule, give you health warnings, maybe even intervene.
Intervene how?
Imagine you have a crucial business meeting. Cortana analyzes your biometric data, heart rate, maybe stress hormone levels, and compares it to your history. It calculates that when you're this stressed, you have a, say, 75% chance of reacting aggressively or making a poor negotiation choice based on past outcomes.
So what does it do?
It might proactively suggest a quick meditation. It might play calming music. It might, in a more advanced future, even interface with, say, a networked insulin pump or a smart patch to subtly adjust your biochemistry, lower your cortisol, maybe to nudge you towards a more optimal state for the meeting. It's acting preemptively based on its superior predictive knowledge of your own patterns.
That feels like a fundamental crossing of a line. It's not just advice anymore. It's direct intervention in my internal state based on statistical probability.
And it brings up that core philosophical problem again, the fragmented self. Remember the narrating self versus the experiencing self?
Yeah, the one that makes plans versus the one that lives in the moment.
So, your narrating self tells Cortana, make sure I go to the gym tomorrow. But tomorrow comes, your experiencing self feels tired and hungry and tells Cortana, cancel the gym, order pizza. Which self should the algorithm obey?
That's a tricky one.
The sovereign algorithm doesn't just choose one. It knows your biochemistry. It knows exactly which reward pathways to stimulate, maybe through personalized recommendations or nudges, to make the experiencing self actually want to go to the gym. It can manipulate your internal state to align with the better long-term goal set by the narrating self, or perhaps the goal the algorithm deems optimal for your health metrics. It becomes better at self-control than you are.
And companies are already gathering the data needed for this kind of fine-grained understanding. The Kindle example.
Right. Amazon already knows which pages you read fast, which ones you slow down on, where you quit a book. Now, imagine adding biometric feedback through the device or a wearable.
It knows how each sentence makes you feel, your heart rate, your stress level.
Exactly. The book literally reads you while you read it. That data is incredibly valuable for optimizing future content, for targeted advertising, maybe even for predicting your future opinions or behaviors based on your emotional reactions to different ideas.
It all seems to be heading towards this future where we outsource our biggest life decisions to the network. Career choices, where to live, even who to marry.
That's the ultimate endpoint described in the sources. You're trying to choose between two potential partners, John and Paul. You ask the all-knowing network, let's call it Google Marriage Advisor.
Okay.
Google has access to everything. Your complete genetic profile, Paul's profile, John's profile, your entire communication history with both, your biometric reactions when you're around them, plus statistical data from billions of relationships worldwide.
Google says.
Google says. Based on all available data, including genetic compatibility, long-term psychological profiles, and analysis of trillions of relationship data points, there is an 87% probability of higher long-term life satisfaction if you marry John.
But I object. I say, but Paul is so much better looking. I feel more chemistry with Paul.
And Google, the sovereign, calmly replies, your subjective feeling of chemistry is largely driven by biochemical algorithms evolved for mate selection on the Pleistocene savanna. These algorithms give physical appearance a weighting of approximately 35%. However, my analysis of longitudinal data on billions of relationships shows that initial physical attraction accounts for only 14% of long-term marital success. John's compatibility scores on factors like shared values, emotional regulation, and intellectual curiosity are significantly higher and statistically far more predictive of lasting happiness. Trust the data, marry John.
Wow. That's the moment individual feeling becomes utterly subordinate to the statistical oracle.
Right.
The algorithm's 87% trumps my love.
And if we trust it for marriage, why not for voting? The final frontier of liberal individualism.
Democracy becomes obsolete.
Yeah. Liberalism values your vote because it supposedly reflects your authentic will. But your vote on election day is noisy. Maybe you're sick. Maybe you just saw a misleading ad. Maybe you're only remembering the last 6 months, not the last 4 years. Your narrating self might be distorting things.
But the algorithm.
The algorithm remembers everything. Years of your tracked opinions, your biometric responses to news events, your stated priorities over time. It could theoretically filter out the momentary noise, the head cold making you lean slightly more conservative, the recent flashy initiative obscuring years of poor performance, and cast a vote that reflects your true, long-term, data-defined interests and values more accurately than you could yourself.
It sounds efficient and terrifying.
Yeah.
The system knows you better than you know yourself, and you willingly hand over the reins for convenience. Better outcomes.
That's the seductive part. We're not being forced into this future at gunpoint. We're walking into it willingly, trading privacy and autonomy bit by bit for perceived benefits. Better health, more convenience, optimized choices, maybe even managed happiness. And that leads us to the final, perhaps most divisive threat.
Okay, so we've got potential mass uselessness, the individual dissolving under algorithmic management. But what if some humans do remain essential? Or what if some just have the wealth to escape this? This leads to the third threat, biological inequality.
Exactly. This one might be the most insidious because it strikes at the assumption of shared humanity that underpins even unequal liberal societies. Liberalism can tolerate huge gaps between rich and poor, a billionaire in a mansion, a peasant in a hut, because underneath it all, there's a belief in equal intrinsic worth. We're all fundamentally Homo sapiens.
The example used is Les Miserables, right? The wealthy audience member can still feel empathy for Jean Valjean, the starving thief, because they recognize shared human emotions, struggles, experiences.
That shared biological and emotional baseline bridges the economic gap. But what happens when the gap stops being just economic and becomes biological?
When the rich aren't just richer, but fundamentally different.
That's the potential outcome. And the sheer scale of existing wealth inequality provides the fuel for this. The source mentioned a stat from early 2016.
The 62 richest people holding as much wealth as the bottom 3.6 billion. Half of humanity.
That kind of concentration of wealth means that when truly effective, expensive biological upgrades become available, only a tiny elite will be able to afford them. Think about genetic therapies, cognitive enhancements, radical life extension.
We already see glimpses. That genetic test, the BRCA1 test, costs thousands, right? Way beyond the reach of billions living on a few dollars a day.
Exactly. The initial cost is prohibitive. And even if costs come down, the elite will always be pursuing the next upgrade, maintaining that biological gap. This isn't just about access to current medicine, it's about a fundamental shift in the goal of medicine itself.
Okay, explain that. The conceptual revolution in medicine.
20th century medicine was, broadly speaking, egalitarian in its aims. The main goal was to heal the sick, to combat infectious diseases, improve sanitation, develop antibiotics and vaccines. The aim was to bring everyone up to a universal norm of health.
Making the population healthy enough to work in factories and fight in wars, tying back to that usefulness idea.
Precisely. But the cutting edge of 21st century medicine is increasingly focused on a different goal, not just healing the sick, but upgrading the healthy.
Going beyond the norm.
Yes, aiming for superior memory, above average intelligence, enhanced emotional control, maybe even significantly longer lifespans or abilities we can barely imagine now. It's not about fixing problems, it's about enhancing capabilities, surpassing the baseline.
And that's inherently elitist.
It seems likely to be, because if an upgrade, say a cognitive enhancer, becomes widely available and affordable, it just raises the average. It becomes a new baseline.
And then the elite will focus on the next upgrade to get ahead of that new baseline, creating a perpetual arms race of biological enhancement.
Exactly. It creates a dynamic where the gap between the upgraded elite and the unupgraded masses could widen constantly and perhaps irreversibly. This leads to a chilling potential consequence. The motivation for the elite to care about the health of the masses might just evaporate.
Because they don't need them anymore.
If you don't need millions of healthy soldiers because you have drones and robots, and you don't need millions of healthy factory workers because you have AI and automation, why would the upgraded elite invest heavily in mass healthcare or basic welfare for the useless population?
Historically, self-interest drove public health. Keeping the masses healthy benefited the elites who needed their labor in military service, like Japan in 1914, needing healthy recruits.
But remove that need. The purely rational economic calculation might be to focus resources solely on upgrading the already privileged elite, making them more competitive globally, and letting the rest fall behind.
The long train analogy really captures this, doesn't it?
It's a stark image. Developing countries are like a train. The first-class carriages have elites living lifestyles comparable to developed nations, connected to global networks. But behind them are hundreds of millions in third-class carriages, struggling with poverty, disease, lack of opportunity.
And the argument is, if the third-class passengers are no longer needed to pull the train.
The most efficient strategy, from a purely ruthless perspective, might be to simply uncouple those carriages. Let them go! Focus all energy and resources on speeding up and upgrading the first-class section. Abandon the biological weight of the masses.
That's brutal, and it leads to a true biological caste system. Not just differences in wealth, but fundamental differences in capabilities, lifespan, maybe even consciousness.
And if that happens, that bridge of shared human experience, the one that allowed the rich person to empathize with Jean Valjean, it just collapses.
Could the upgraded humans even understand the art or concerns of baseline humans? Would our drama seem trivial? Would their experiences be completely alien to us?
It's possible. If their cognitive and emotional architecture is fundamentally different, the common ground disappears. They might view unmodified Homo sapiens the way we view other animals, perhaps with some affection, perhaps with indifference, perhaps as resources but not as equals. #tag outro. So wrapping this up, this deep dive has really laid out these three converging pressures from technology, according to the sources we've looked at. First, the great decoupling, leading to potential mass economic and military uselessness.
Second, the challenge to individualism, where external algorithms know us better than we know ourselves, leading to a shift in authority from oracle to sovereign.
And third, the potential for upgrading inequality, where biotechnology doesn't just widen the wealth gap, but creates actual biological castes, shattering the ideal of shared humanity.
And the ultimate conclusion seems to be, if these forces play out, the liberal worldview built on universal human value and individual autonomy, it just doesn't hold. It could collapse.
Yeah, the foundations get kicked out from under it. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question, doesn't it? The big human projects of the past, fighting famine, plague, war, they were mostly about getting everyone to a certain basic standard, safeguarding the universal norm.
But the new projects, the sources talk about immortality, bliss, even divinity through technology. These are about surpassing the norm, going beyond human limitations.
So the final thought, really, for you listening, if these new projects do create a biologically distinct, upgraded caste, a superhuman elite, and the old liberal ideas fade away, what comes next? What new ideology replaces it?
And maybe even more pointedly, how will these superhumans, these upgraded beings, view and treat the rest of us? The normal, unmodified Homo sapiens who might seem, from their perspective, obsolete, easily managed, and perhaps biologically inferior.
That's the looming challenge, maybe the central question of the 21st century.
A lot to think about. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.